On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, it seems we're in the closing days of the Toronto Raptors coaching search. What do we know about the potential candidates who have been brought to Toronto for in-person interviews? Plus, there seems to be a bit of European influence to the Raptors search. Does that mean anything about the team's intentions going forward? We'll get to all that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors with Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com. Let's get to it, baby!
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every freaking day. It is Monday, June the 5th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean if you're still using Twitter. You can also follow the show on Instagram, and you can join the show's growing Locked On Raptors Discord community. Super fun, great place for talk about the team in a very agreeable and polite fashion. Even when we disagree, it's friendly disagreement. What a thing to be found on the internet in 2023. The link to join is in the description of the podcast. Come hang out, super fun. And I'm giving like free stuff out in there sometimes. You get priority for mailbag questions. There are perks to it as well. So come and hang out. You can also find the show and support it on your favorite podcast apps by subscribing, rating, reviewing, telling a friend, and of course, subscribing to the YouTube channel, which is just like a big red button. You can't miss it when you go to the channel. Even if you're not going to watch the videos every day, just subscribe so we can juice the stats. All right, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. All right, Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com is here. Let's get to it. We're talking about the coaching search, which seems to be in the final closing hours. It seems, I would bet by the end of this week, we know who the coach of your Toronto Raptors is going to be. So we're going to set the stage here, get a look at the 4 remaining candidates per the latest reporting from Marc Stein and his wonderful Substack newsletter, get into what the nature of the candidates might suggest about what the Raptors want to do as a team, and maybe rank our preferences as well a little later on. Big V from Raptors.com, you're here. How the hell are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. Enjoying, we got the NBA Finals, we got the French Open. I'm enjoying Joker by day, Joker by night. So it's all good here, man.
Banner week for Serbia, huh? Just having a time with all of their joke-related players who are anything but jokes because they're bloody incredible. NBA Finals, man. I'm glad we got a series. I still think Denver's going to win it, but it's cool that we got ourselves a fun little series after last night's game. I also totally thought Jamal Murray was going to tie the game at the buzzer because that's what Jamal Murray tends to do. This is not a podcast. This is not a podcast about... Oh, yeah, carry on. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, did you see the point differential that John Schumann put out for the Heat base per quarter?
I did not.
So for the playoffs, 20 playoff games, Miami is -1 in the first quarter, -11 in the second quarter, -12 in the third quarter, and +90 in the fourth.
Sure, that's normal. Checks out. Yeah, for sure. Man, the Heat just keep on doing it, huh? This is not a podcast about the NBA Finals, though, Big V. This is a podcast about a team that is hoping to one day get back to the NBA Finals, and the first step in that is hiring a coach. It seems like we're getting close to that. The latest reporting from Marc Stein, he's been, I think, the guy who's been most up on this, and his wonderful Substack newsletter is pretty essential at this time of year. He's got it down, it seems, to 4 candidates, the 4th of whom I didn't add to the rundown on the side of the page until because we just found out about it just before going on to record. So apologies there. But it seems as though Sergio Scariolo, former Raptors assistant, Jordi Fernández, the 40-year-old assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings, and Darko Rajaković, the assistant coach with the Memphis Grizzlies out of Serbia, are among the finalists. In addition, Kenny Atkinson, the former Brooklyn Nets head coach, now an assistant with the Warriors, is reportedly coming to Toronto for an in-person interview as well. So it's down to those 4. The late addition of Atkinson to this list, courtesy Marc Stein's reporting, which came out just before we started recording, throws a little bit of a wrench into the Euro flavor I wanted to focus on today's show. But before we get into the implications of, really focusing, it seems, on a bit more of a European influence with at least 3 of these candidates. I just want to get your sort of read on things, Big V. This has been a long search. I think you can't blame the Raptors for not doing their due diligence. They've spoken to coaches from all over the world and the podcasting industry and failed former coaches and successful former coaches on down the line. Pretty ready for this thing to be resolved, though, no, huh?
Yeah, this is that time you want to, get him in, whoever it may be, in time for the draft workouts that are remaining. And be set for the draft, right? And I think sort of go from there. I think the way it's shaking out, the names that are in this finalist category are pleasing to me. I think they've narrowed it down really well. If I were to power rank it, I'd probably go with Jordi Fernández number 1. I think he would be an excellent coach for this team. I think he's so, even though he's young, he's so experienced. And like, you track back to starting off, at least NBA wise, with Mike Brown and the Cavs, and that relationship that he's been able to build with Mike Brown, and it extends over to the Nigeria team as well, right? And so don't ignore that connection with Masai. So I think I'd have him number 1. And maybe more of like a 1A, 1B type thing with Sergio Scariolo right behind. And then, you look at Kenny Atkinson, you look at, Darko Rajaković. I think those are good options as well. So I think at this point, I feel comfortable that if it's one of the 4, the Raptors will be in good hands. And that's really all you can ask for at this point.
I'm 100% with you. I'm encouraged by the sort of outside the box nature of a lot of these names. Obviously, Kenny Atkinson would be a technical retread, but his previous tenure ended mostly because the Nets were a giant tire fire of a franchise. I think less about anything Kenny Atkinson personally did to be involved in that. If I'm not mistaken, he got fired the year Kevin Durant was out and hurt. Am I wrong there? And so, yeah, because Jacques Vaughn was the coach for the Nets in the bubble. It was 2020, I believe, when that went down.
Right.
Like right around the pandemic hitting, I think. I remember being in an Uber from the Hershey Center to downtown to go see a TFC game after watching a 905 game. This was like March the 10th or something like that. And that's when the Kenny Atkinson thing was like just breaking. And so, I don't think Kenny Atkinson's time in Brooklyn ended really for anything that he did wrong, as much as it was just the Nets putting this toxic elixir of players together. I think we'll get into this in a second. I do really find some encouragement by the sort of European influence they seem to be looking at, specifically as it pertains to what went wrong with the Raptors' offense last season. We'll elaborate a little bit more on that. But overall, I'm with you. I think the fact that they have gone super broad in their search, this isn't surprising. They did a similar thing back in 2019 when they hired, or 2018 when they hired Nick Nurse. They were talking to Sarunas Jasikevičius. They were talking to all sorts. Ettore Messina was on the list as well. All sorts of like European influenced player or coaches. I think that's clearly something that Masai, as sort of someone with an eye on the global game and the trends within the game, that's clearly something he's doing to hopefully maybe put himself in that situation where the Raptors have an edge again. Right? They have not really been that team that's been ahead of the curve over the last little while. And it's not to say that whoever they hire is instantly going to put them ahead of the curve, but it does signal some different thinking, some outside the box thinking in a direction that the league seems to be kind of tilting already. And so we'll get into that a little bit more on the other side, the idea of the European influence potentially being at play here for the Raptors. We'll do that in just one sec. Before we dive into that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, who have made daily fantasy sports super fun, super easy, and super accessible. It's a lot of fun to play daily fantasy sports whenever you want to dabble. It doesn't require the season-long commitment of fantasy sports. It doesn't really even require you to do it every single night throughout the playoffs. It's just something you can dabble in with your time when you want to. And Prize Picks is a great way to do it because you're not up against the projections. You're not starting from behind the eight ball, as it were. You're just looking at the projections and predicting whether the player is going to go more or less than a given projection in a certain stat, whether it's points, rebounds, threes made, on down the line. And all you got to do is pick 2 to 6 players for your entry any given day. And if you get them all right, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. That is incredible. Again, no competing against anything but the projections on the site. No shadow experts putting together some team that you can't possibly beat behind the scenes. And they offer projections on any sport you can watch, which includes the NBA, of course, but also everything else, literally. Women's college basketball, the WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, disc golf, cricket. It's all in there. So go check them out over at Prize Picks right now. Download the Prize Picks app and go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's $100 of Prize Picks money joining your money in your account when you use the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day. Thanks, as always, to the everydayers of the podcast who tune in every day to see me or listen to me and whoever my guest is, probably the guest, because you can't possibly want to see me every day, right? I don't even think my wife wants to do that, but you're the best. Thanks. Let us know in the comments if you are an everydayer. Let's continue on here, Big V. The European influence. This is something I'm really fascinated by. Obviously, Sergio Scariolo coaches the Spanish national team. He is coaching for Virtus Bologna right now over in Italy. Darko Rajaković comes from Serbia, also an extensive history in European basketball. Jordi Fernández, from Spain originally, has spent a lot of time assistant coaching one Nikola Jokic, about the most European-inspired basketball player you could possibly imagine with the array of passing and sort of team play he inspires. Are you encouraged by this potential European lean for the Toronto Raptors? I have my thoughts on this. I think it's very exciting, but I'm curious from your end, how are you feeling about if the Raptors do go in this sort of European influence direction? We've seen them do it as a franchise in the past, of course, under Brian Colangelo. Feels a little different this time, as that felt like the only way they could get any players on their team who were worth anything. But curious of your thoughts on this potential European influence they might have in their head coach if they hire anybody but Kenny Atkinson from this final batch.
Yeah, I guess we got to wait and see if Maurizio Gherardini is going to be part of the press conference.
Bring him back, baby.
Well, hopefully they don't bring back those jerseys, like the Italian-inspired ones. The
Spanish ones. Yeah.
I think we're okay without those. But, honestly, I think when you look at the experiences of these guys, the biggest thing I look at is they are like hardcore hoop heads.
Yeah.
Like when you look at Darko Rajakovic's history, the man started coaching when he was 16.
Yep.
Like he loves basketball, and like to go through every step and be where he is now. I think it's a matter of time before he's a head coach. And I reading more stuff on him, it was like even when he was like 25 years old, he was like reaching out to Mike Krzyzewski and like Lute Olson, being like, "Hey, can I just come, pick your brain and learn from you and this and that." And then, you look at the time that he spent with OKC. I think that's really important as well in terms of dealing with a young team that was on the rise, that had superstars as well. So, that experience of, seeing what it's like, okay, this is how you cater, you cope with superstars and, try to get the chemistry to mesh and all of that. And then again, you look at someone like Jordi Fernández, again, so many different experiences that he's had, almost in some ways like similar to Nick Nurse, right? Because he has the D-League coaching experience as well with the Canton Charge. And so I think at the end of the day, going back to the point I made about feeling very comfortable, is like you look at the experience of these guys, it's well worth being in a head coaching position.
Absolutely. And I do think the having experience in the head coach job, which both Rajaković and Fernandez do. Obviously, Scariolo does. He's the head coach right now of the team he's working for. Atkinson obviously has head coach experience. I think that matters. Like I've said all along throughout this search, and sort of this is my general philosophy on coaching, is the head coach position is so vastly different in just its nature than any other coaching job, just because it is so dependent on your ability to interact with your guys and make everyone feel empowered and kind of get everybody on the same page on top of all the X's and O's stuff. And I think, it's the type of thing you just never know how they're going to adapt to that sort of element of the job until you're in it. And so having guys who have been there before, who have experienced being the head coach and having that burden on their plate, I think is really valuable. I think a lot about Nate Bjorkgren just kind of getting thrown into the Pacers job and clearly having no capacity for the sort of human side of the job, and him being out of a job within a year. Like, it's not to say every new coach who hasn't been a head coach somewhere is doomed to fail, but there's way less in terms of track record and things to point at as far as real tangible experience to inform how they might perform in the head coach job for the NBA squad that is the Toronto Raptors. And so all these guys having head coaching experience is valuable and I think really good. The other thing to me with this European sort of influence they seem to be kind of leaning at with Scariolo, Fernandez, and Rajaković is, what do we think about when we think about the thing that sucked most about watching the Raptors this past year? It's their offense. Their half-court offense stinks, and it's a slog. It's ISO hunting. It's mismatch hunting. It's dribble around for a long time and hope for a late clock bailout. It got a little better. Truth, it should be said. I would argue a lot better as far as aesthetics after Jakob arrived. There was just more stuff going on. They were able to run more stuff with Yak from the post and the elbow, and there was just more movement and stuff at play in the Raptors offense after the trade. But still, boil it down, they're an ISO hunting team. They try to maximize the size they have on the floor by seeking out mismatches where it can be exploited. And that's good as a tool in the toolbox, but I don't think you can run an offense like that in 2023 and hope to reach the success that you're seeing most teams reach in the playoffs. It's tilted over the last 10 years or so. Yes, defense is still incredibly valuable, but if your offense is butt, you're not going deep in the playoffs anymore. That's just how it all works. And we're seeing it now. The Heat are only where they are because their offense has become an absolute machine over the course of the playoffs, and that's a credit to them. The Raptors have to find a way to create a little bit more dynamism within their offense. And I think when you think about the European game, which is very different than the North American game, it is a lot more predicated on ball movement and set designs and passing and cohesion, something the Raptors sorely lacked this year. I really am encouraged by the fact that the Raptors are leaning into that European style with at least 3 of these 4 candidates. And, Kenny Atkinson has not exactly coached traditional teams, right? Like, he was an assistant on those Hawks teams where they were just like, all right, 5 for 1, everyone is a player of the month type of thing. He's been on the Warriors, who, of course, are a Steph Curry machine, but they run within a beautiful orchestrated system. And so I'm really encouraged by those influences potentially coming into the Raptors offense. And I think it's something even more exciting to consider if the Raptors do, in fact, try this Scottie, Pascal, Jakob front court again, which I know we've talked about. There are limitations. I know you're particularly concerned about the lack of space and all of that. That's totally fair. But if you're trying to make it work, getting someone in there who can help maximize 3 guys who are all well above average passers for their positions and trying to make it work using those strengths, I think that's pretty encouraging. And I think someone with a little bit more of a sort of a finger on the pulse of the European style of play probably stands a better chance of that. I mentioned Jordi Fernández, longtime assistant with Nikola Jokic, and now with Domantas Sabonis in that beautiful offense they're running down in Sacramento. I mentioned, we know Scariolo. They have a whole thing called Spain pick and roll. They love to run beautiful sets in Spain, baby. This is what we want. This is the structure potentially that the Raptors were missing on that end this year. I talked a long time there. Thoughts in response, any retorts to what I just laid out as to why the European influence excites me, particularly when it comes to how the Raptors might change the way they play offense.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think when you look at the offensive struggles, I think having these guys who are creative on the offensive end matters. And I think when you look at, again, I go back to that relationship that Jordi Fernández has with Mike Brown, and you look at the way Mike Brown has evolved as a head coach and the things he's doing with the Sacramento Kings. It's hard to look at that and not think there's a big part of it that goes to Jordi Fernández as well, right? And there's a reason Mike Brown is like continually keeping him close, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's Sacramento, whether it's Cleveland, and so I think that's where there's a lot to admire about that. I think you look at Jordi Fernández's educational background as well in sports psychology, and that understanding of culture and what they're trying to build. And that's another thing when I go back to Scariolo, even beyond the offense, you look at the culture of, say, a Spanish national team, right? That is something that everyone admires, and that brotherhood that they share. And so you want him to bring something like that to the table. I think whatever I've read about Darko Rajaković so far, players have raved about how much he cares about them and how much time he puts into actually working with them in a positive manner and uplifting them. So I think all of that bodes really, really well. And when you think about, the boxes that Masai and the front office wanted checked when they spoke first about, moving on from Nick Nurse, these guys seem to check all of those boxes.
Absolutely. I'm pretty encouraged, man. We'll come back on the other side. I want to get into Kenny Atkinson a little bit more because that is, I think, maybe a little more counter to what people were hoping for as far as a retread. Again, not the same type of retread as your typical dude who kind of bounces around the league and just has experience, capital H, capital E. But we'll get into that, and we will try to sort through and maybe make some predictions as to who we think it'll be. Closing out the show, we'll get to that in a hot second. Before we do that, however, just a reminder, go check out Locked On Leafs, baby. Just like the Toronto Raptors, the Buds are going into a wild off season where there could be lots of change, big-time shifts in personnel, and our pals Mike and Dave over on Locked On Leafs do a wonderful job breaking it all down for you, so go listen or watch wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube each and every day. All right, Big V, let's talk a little more Kenny Atkinson here. He's kind of the fourth guy, very clearly the sort of one of these things doesn't belong here among these final four, just in the sort of figurative sense, not literally. He's obviously very much a worthy candidate for this job. He does run counter to the sort of get someone new in there, get some fresh ideas. He's been a head coach before. He's been around the way. Like I said, I think the Brooklyn thing, not so much on him as much as it was just on Brooklyn being Brooklyn. But, is there any sort of concern when it comes to the Kenny Atkinson thing? Of course, a year ago, he accepted the Charlotte job and then backed out. Probably wise, honestly, because the Charlotte Hornets are a rudderless mess. But, the more sort of, I think, critical onlookers of the Raptors would suggest maybe they're also a rudderless mess. I don't think I agree with that, but that's certainly a take that's out there. Thoughts on Kenny Atkinson as a potential candidate here? And do you, are you thrown off at all by the fact that he has been a head coach in the NBA before, which maybe is an asset, maybe it's not. I don't really know. Where are you at with Kenny Atkinson if he is to be the guy?
I've been high on Kenny Atkinson from the beginning, so I'd be quite happy to see him be the head coach. I think going back to the offenses he's worked with, like you mentioned, Atlanta, let's not forget he was also with Mike D'Antoni with the Knicks. Right. And so, when I think of the Brooklyn Nets team that he coached and the culture that he was building there, I think all of that was very positive until KD and Kyrie came aboard. I think the offense that he was trying to run and get the best out of players, that was very positive. And so I think he would be a good hire as well. So again, between these four candidates, obviously there's flaws to pick out with each one. No one's perfect, but if you told me these were the four that the Raptors were going to pick from at the beginning, I'd be very happy. So I don't think there's, a bad direction to take here.
Yeah, they have not brought a Kevin O'Neal type into the conversation, which I think is what you want. Yes, the Raptors need to be good at defense as well. I think the base level talent on the roster as it stands can get them there, and like they just need far more innovation on the offensive end of the floor, I think, at all. So I do think the offensive lean, and again, you mentioned the sort of the camaraderie side of things, which is probably honestly the most important, right? Like if you as a coach can't get the team pulling in the same direction, can't get everybody on the same page, you failed at job number one of being a head coach in the NBA. And you mentioned the sort of the word that's described. They used the word, the word that I think Kevin Arnovitz used to describe Darko Rajaković when writing him up in one of his final assistant coach pieces, which it was a wonderful annual thing that he did, and now he's not doing basketball writing anymore. Which come back, Kevin. We miss those coach pieces. They're great. But the word that was used a lot with Darko Rajaković is warmth, and just like the way he interacts with his players, he carries that sort of warmth and sort of convivial vibe, and I think that's really exciting. I think with Jordi Fernández as well, it's very similar. It seems like he's very player friendly. I think you have to have someone in this day and age who is player friendly, who can sort of level with guys. He's 40 years old. He's not like super out of touch or anything like that. And Amit Mann had a great interview. I can't remember the name of the person he was interviewing, talking about Jordi Fernández, someone who covers the Kings, and they kind of dug into like the little things that Jordi Fernández will do to kind of like throw his players a bone. He mentioned one instance of kind of in a game asking a guy, "Hey, where do you like your shots from?" in like a preseason game, and then instantly drawing something up to get that person that shot. It was Keegan Murray to get him that corner shot in a summer league game, just because that's where he said he wanted those shots from, and so he designed something instantly. That's a small thing that doesn't hint at a greater ability as a head coach necessarily, but I do think it hints at kind of understanding the need to level with your players, especially in today's game, which whether that feels like even more of an important thing, not just because the players are younger and changing and are it's sort of like a different dynamic, but also it's a situation where like I've lost my train of thought, but it's a situation. I start a sentence sometimes, not knowing where it's going to end. That's the thing. But no, I just think having the ability to level with players and get them bought in the NBA right now, where everyone's so talented, there's talent across every roster, up and down. The thing that's going to get you to that next level is that sort of intangible stuff. I fully believe this. You can't quantify it. There's no number to put on it, but I've watched enough basketball. I've seen what happened with this past year's Raptors team. I've seen what happens with successful teams versus non-successful teams. And to a man, you'll see successful teams come together and sort of, it's corny and cheesy, but they're all rowing in the same direction. And a coach who can get that going, I think that is really job number one. And again, we don't know until they're actually in the job, but the inklings you get from these guys and sort of the way they're painted suggests that they understand that is a massive part of the job. I'm a little interested with Scariolo, honestly, just because like he's a little older, I think he's about 62 or something like that. And as much as we have the experience of him being an assistant with the Raptors, where he was a very beloved character, I don't know if we know as much as it's like I don't watch a lot of Virtus Bologna, so I don't really have like a great sort of handle on Scariolo's day-to-day as a head coach himself. He's obviously got the experience there. Does the sort of age factor in here for you at all with Scariolo? If he's the best guy, you just hire him anyway, or would you like to see them skew younger?
I mean, I don't think it's too old. I think, it's not like they're looking to hire a guy that's going to be around for, at least the next decade. Right. I think you're just trying to transition into that next phase the best way possible.
Sure.
So I wouldn't, have that as a deciding factor, but I do think in terms of just the candidates themselves, it might be true that Jordi Fernández is just a better candidate right now.
Yeah.
And, even Rajaković stacks up pretty nicely. So, yeah, I think it's just flat out about choosing who you think will be the best fit. I think there's a fair question to be asked, in terms of, not knowing the day-to-day of, Scariolo as a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, obviously they would have done this as part of their digging, is like, hey, what were the relationships like throughout a whole season, right? Like when we talk about, Spain's national team, that culture, building that is great, but you're also you're together for very short periods of time, right? And so what does that look like over a 7-month, 8-month period where you're now together all the time, right? And so I think those are maybe the more pertinent questions to ask. But I think having had an extensive a career as he's had, it's probably in good shape.
I'm with you there. I think there is something nice about the idea of like hiring a young coach who can grow with your franchise and be a 20-year head coach for your team. Guess what? There's like one Greg Popovich or Eric Spoelstra per generation, and the odds that you're going to get that guy are pretty slim. That said, I don't think I would rule out Scariolo because of his age or anything like that. He's very clearly got the goods, and I don't think they can really go wrong here. Let's close this out. In keeping with the sort of gigantic guessing game that is trying to determine whom the head coach will be and what that coach will bring to the team, let's just do a wild prediction game, shall we? Who you think is going to actually get the job, Big V, between now and the end of the week? We're assuming we're going to know. Who you got? What's your pick here? We might even know by tomorrow. So, get the pick on wax now. Who's your prediction? Again, in keeping with the whole thing of talking about coaches, which are a giant black box, give us a totally blind prediction based on nothing but your gut intuition, baby.
I think Jordi Fernández will be the new head coach of the Toronto Raptors.
You beat me to the punch. I also think Jordi Fernández is going to be the new head coach of the Toronto Raptors. Again, completely baseless in this guess. But I do think Marc Stein has made enough notes of keep an eye on Jordi Fernández. And he's been really on this coaching stuff. He was on the Monty Williams thing first. He's been all over this. I'm going to go with what the experts are saying. And Marc Stein is as plugged in as anybody with this. And he keeps on just keep an eye on Jordi Fernández. Keep an eye on Jordi Fernández. And so I'm going to keep an eye on Jordi Fernández. I think we will all be keeping an eye on Jordi Fernández for a very long time. And if it's the podcast comes out tomorrow and they've hired Kenny Atkinson, we'll just delete this back part of the show for posterity.
Hey, between Fernandez and Rajaković, I'll be really happy. I can talk to Rajaković about Novak. I can talk to Fernandez about soccer, and so we'll be
Nadal, of course.
Yeah,
there you go. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Nadal's not going to be around much longer.
No, but you can do some reflection upon his career. That's always fun. Just sidetrack a pregame presser before a Hornets game on a Wednesday, just to talk a little bit about Rafa Nadal. It seems great to me. We'll see. Maybe we're right. Maybe we're geniuses. Maybe we're total fools. Who's to say? You don't watch us because we're right. You watch us because we're entertaining. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much to all y'all for listening and tuning into the show and supporting it. Big V, anything you got to do to promote before we get out of here?
Just the usual stuff. Raptors.com and CBC Sports, and you can follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Everyone go do that. You can follow me at Woodley Sean. You can join the Lockdown Raptors Discord. Link in the description. Come hang out. Super fun. And again, sometimes I'm giving out free things. Sometimes I'm handing out, free tickets to mailbag questions and stuff like that. Free tickets to mailbag questions? That's not a thing. Priority to mailbag questions. That's what I was looking at. Anyway, thank you so much. We'll be back again tomorrow as I'm going to do a little deep dive into Bilal Coulibaly, who is, of course, Victor Wembanyama's teammate with Metropolitans 92, who seems like an extremely Raptors-ass pick at number 13. We'll get to that tomorrow. Until then, thank you for tuning in. Go listen to Friday's show with Katie Heindel talking about Fred VanVleet and where he's going to go. Lots of prospect stuff from last week as well. Jordan Hawkins talk, Keontae George on down the line. Go check it all out. Thank you for supporting the show. We'll talk to you Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.